From the world of AV programming and control with James King, I'm Steve Greenblatt, and this is Ask the Programmer. James, how are you today? I'm glad we're back, and we're back to normal, talking about some programming today. And if you haven't heard some of our past episodes recently, we've been talking a little bit about business. So, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing good. I enjoyed our business talks, but it's good to get back to our roots of programming here, and looking forward to this episode and our guests today.
Absolutely. And as we introduce her, I just wanted to share if you did like our recent episodes, we talked a little bit about the Total Tech Summit, which is an event that's being held in November, and we're in 2024. We had a few of those panelists on. We talked to Dan Farisi. Check those out. Let us know what you think, and if you want to hear more about that side of the industry, we're glad to talk about it. But we're back to programming today, and we have a great guest, somebody who I've gotten to know over the past year. We got to meet in person at ISE at first, and I've been following her podcast. And without further ado, it's Britt Yenser. Welcome, Britt.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be on Ask the Programmer.
Thanks for being with us. And if you don't know Britt, you should. So Britt is the AV manager at Northampton Community College. Has a lot of accolades. She's very involved in HETMA, and she is the host of the Brave Space podcast, which I highly recommend. I've been on. I know James has been on, and it's a great way to talk about some of the things that need to be talked about. Just in general. It's AV related, but it's really good content, and I'll give her a chance to talk about that as well later. But we're here a little bit to get to know you, Britt, and I understand that you've had your first true foray into programming, and you're here. You want to talk about that a bit. So tell us a little bit about your background, your journey in AV, and what brings you to programming.
So thank you for the very nice intro. So I've been on quite a quest as far as a career goes, because as an undergrad, I had studied English and education, and I started my career originally as a high school English teacher. So nothing to do with AV at all. But I had, as a work study student, worked for the AV department from my first semester, freshman year, all the way through to senior year. I think if I could have worked my own commencement instead of crossing the stage, I probably would have preferred to do that. Like, it was just, the AV team were my family throughout my undergrad. And I don't know if you can tell from the everything about me, but if I have something in my head, I'm like, that's what I'm doing. So I went off and taught, because in my head, I was like, that's the career I want. And I taught for 2 years, and it was fine. I have nothing against teaching, but I realized how much I missed my AV family and how much I actually really enjoyed that line of work. And it started to kind of click in my brain that that was actually a career possibility. So I stopped teaching and circled back to AV. And it just so happened that there was an opening at my alma mater in the department that I loved so much to be able to pursue that. So I started working there. Eventually, over the course, I was there for about 7 years. So over the course of that time, my role kept kind of shifting and expanding in different ways, and my focus became exclusively live events. So the thing about that particular institution is they rightfully so consider events to be an integral part of the educational experience. They recognize it's not just what happens in academic spaces, but what happens socially. So I was like hair on fire busy supporting the technology to do like these really cool events, which is fun. But I think anyone who does AV for events will tell you it doesn't feel super sustainable on a long enough timeline. And I also like was in the room when programming and design was happening, and I thought it was cool, but it didn't fit into my role. And I was like, I'm getting tired. I keep kind of doing the same events over and over again because it is higher ed, and I'm in this rhythm, and I'm starting to feel a little bored. And there's other stuff going on too. And I was just like, I want to try something new. I want to try this programming thing, this design thing. Like, it's going to make me feel like a more well-rounded AV professional. So I ended up here at NCC as their AV manager, and programming and design is an official part of my role. So I started here as of this recording 5 months ago. And in 5 months, I got the Extron control specialist training complete. I've started to do some really basic programming things, as well as some basic design things. I've done like 2 rooms so far that need a little upgrades. I think that if I had to describe like where I'm at in my learning journey, I'm probably at the like I can apply things stage. Like I'm not really at the like evaluation and creation part up at the top, but like I'm halfway there.
And everybody goes through that, so that's it's natural, and it's probably a good thing to be able to understand what you don't know. I believe in that.
Yeah.
What have you learned thus far that you thought was was either unique or you didn't expect to be part of programming?
I was surprised that as far as what I've seen in Extron so far felt really learnable to me, because prior to getting that training experience, I always kind of thought programming was like Python, like like really complex things that like God bless you if your brain understands that. I'm not sure if my brain is for that. But like Extron in particular seems to make it pretty straightforward and simple, where I was like, yeah, I understand what you're doing here. And I'm not trying to minimize it. Like it is challenging, but it's a level of challenge I feel comfortable meeting versus like I don't know. I've seen people open up command portals on PCs and type gibberish in and something happens. And I'm like, I don't understand what you're doing.
So one thing, and James, you could jump in on this that we tend to talk about is the difference between programming and configuration, and there's nothing wrong with either one, and there's nothing there one is not better or necessarily superior to the other, but that's what you're describing essentially, is that
Mm-hmm.
there's the one that's more user centric versus the one that's more technical, and so the configuration is made to be something that will be a much better interface for you to get to the result you're looking for versus having to sit down and write all the line code that you mentioned.
Yes.
Personally, I know we'll get onto this as we go, but the design part of what you're describing in terms of your role really suits configuration very well, because you really are thinking about what you want the system to do, not necessarily how to make that happen.
Mhm.
And that's what I think is one of the differences, is that and that's one of the foundations of programming is, can you define in English what the result you're trying to get? And part of the challenge is also understanding what is best for the user, and that's a big aspect of programming that a lot of people don't always realize. They think of it, just as you said, as be kind of more geeky and sitting and writing code, but really a programmer needs to have these other parts before they could either configure or program.
Yeah, and I will say, like, the one thing I'm really, really good at is talking to the end client and figuring out what they want a system to do. And I think part of that comes from my experience as an educator in the K through 12 system too. So like I have some insight into methods you might be using for teaching. I have some insight into how you might be approaching this room as an educator. Like I can meet you where you are and have that conversation with you. And then I go back to my desk and I sit down and figure out, like, in general terms, based on what they told me, what type of hardware do I need, and start to kind of diagram that out. One thing that gives me immense anxiety, I can't tell you how much anxiety, is the idea that I'm going to choose the wrong hardware. Like I'm going to read something wrong and it's not going to communicate the way I think it's going to. And then I wasted time and money. That like keeps me up at night. Um, and then the programming piece too of the learning, like or you know, just the, okay, now that I put everything together, I put stuff into a rack and I wired it up, and now I have to tell it how to communicate with itself. Like I've, I can do the bare bone, like, you know, put it on a display, switch from projector to HDMI cable to dock cam to whatever. That's where I'm at. I'm not doing anything too insane right now.
It's all important though. And James, do you want to jump in on that?
So I want to actually harp on and highlight what you just said there, Britt, of you know how to do what you said, kind of the fundamental. I can send something to the display. When you boil it down, that's really all we're doing in rooms. Doesn't matter how big. You even take a football stadium. They're setting a video source and setting it to multiple displays. It's doing the same kind of commands. You're just scaling it larger. So if you can get those fundamentals down, you can scale it very well. Because that's how I tackled my first big project. I know I mentioned on this podcast in the past is like I had a huge event room that I had to write code for. I've never done one with that. I was like, how do I even start? And my first one was like, well, I know how to turn on and off a projector. So I wrote the code for doing that. Now went from one projector to 3 projectors. So once I got that out, and just started cutting it down to smaller parts. So those fundamentals are very key for it. So don't discredit those. Don't say, I only know the fundamentals, because if you don't know the fundamentals, then you know nothing.
That's fair.
Another thing that you're fortunate to be able to be in front of the equipment. So I learned programming and a lot of the programming that my team does because we're an outside resource is we do it by predicting how to work with the equipment and what the equipment will do. And sometimes we have to simulate the equipment in order to ensure that the program is working the way we anticipate it is. So there's actually quite an advantage to be able to have that equipment to play with. And we've talked a lot on the show about having a lab. So if you have a lab, you could test out some equipment, you could play with it, you can feel free to make mistakes. And James says this all the time is that if we're not making mistakes, we're not learning.
Mhm.
So it's that's there's nothing wrong with your biggest your biggest learning moments are going to come from the failures.
Mm.
um, how have you gone about trying to challenge yourself or to do things that will help you grow? Have you gotten to that point in terms of I can make this work, but what if I tried to make that work?
I am not quite there yet. And to be honest, that's a challenge that I have because I sometimes I find it difficult to push myself out of my comfort zone when it comes to technical things. I kind of hit that stride of like, I know that this thing's definitely going to work. And I think maybe it's just because I didn't have a whole lot of, I started in May and the summer was very much like get acclimated, and then the school year began, and I feel like really scared to experiment during the school year because I'm like, I need for things to just work or people are gonna get mad. But like I'm
Yes.
looking forward to the breaks, like maybe winter break, summer break, when it's just like a little bit quieter. I feel like that's when I can kind of break out and be like, let me try something, because if it doesn't work, that feels less scary.
Fair
That's,
enough. Fair
yeah,
enough.
that's definitely good. But like going back to what Steve and I were talking about in the past, and even Steve brought up now, is you should try, and we can't always do that. I been trying to do it from day one, and it's almost been 2 years in my new role, is build that sandbox environment where you can play and it doesn't impact productions. Because even if you do a winter break or a summer break and you're like, hey, I'm gonna try this new cool feature, and you go put it into a production room and your users come back and go, I hate this. Now you gotta roll back anyway. Where what I would do is I set up my sandbox, I roll out features, I test them, and I might have key stakeholders or champions come in and be like, hey, play with this and let me know what you think before you actually put it into a production room.
I love that. Yeah, and we've talked about the idea of a sandbox here, and I think we have gone so far as to secure a room where that might be able to happen. But that room kind of quickly morphed into we can put the things we get delivered to us here. Um, so I think we're kind of on a journey right now of trying to figure out how best to use this room and share it with our other IT partners and make something like a sandbox. But I totally agree. I love the power of a sandbox, and I would really like to have one for sure.
So Britt just hinted on a very common thing in higher ed is if you have a space, someone else wants it. If you're not using that space to the full
Yeah.
effect, someone else will move in. I still remember back in my old job, one time we were downsizing some of our equipment rack in our media area because, you know, we streamlined things. So a lot of racks came out. We went from like 5 or 6 42U racks down to like 3. And as we're making room, some administrations walk by and go, you folks have a lot of room down here. And we were like, just close the door. You don't see this. Like, keep walking. We're not giving this area up. So yeah, it's definitely good. One school I heard, I forget, I'm trying to remember who it was. I would love to do something like what they did, but again, space is always a premium. But they turned one of their classrooms into a sandbox classroom. So it's actually a teaching room, but the present faculty actually have to sign up for it with the notes of, hey, this is new equipment. We're testing things out. So things may not be fine-tuned. So it's actually, I thought that was a cool idea because then you actually get real life kicking of the tires. It just now you have to dedicate a room to that way. And we know in higher ed, rooms are very premium.
So a good question that I think is worth discussing is when you run into problems, what do you do? Do you phone a friend? Do you call tech support? Do you try to figure it out on your own? And what's the how quickly do you take action? Just as a curiosity, because I know everybody has a different philosophy on that.
Yeah, and it really, I'm learning I almost can't have a philosophy because there's so many caveats. Like it really does depend on the location because we have 3 different campuses. So like which campus is it happening on? Who's available to address it? Who's the faculty member? Because I'm noticing a lot of our faculty are like I don't want you to disrupt my class to figure out what's going on. This is not a big deal. I'll write on the whiteboard and you come back later. So and that's hard for me because I am a person who's like, I'm gonna activate and get this fixed now. But I recognize like you don't want me in here because you're trying to do something. So I'll be back. So yeah, it like really is highly dependent on a lot of different factors and a lot of different personalities. I will say, like, when I am able to get in there and I have the time, I always start by trying to figure it out by myself because that's been a big part of my learning process, just understanding like what is in this rack, what do each of these boxes do? If I follow the cables that I'm seeing, what's connected to what, and that is really teaching me like what do we even have in our racks in these rooms and what are they doing? And then as I figured that out, I usually can see in the chain like what went wrong. There have been times, especially on our Pocono campus, where I have been on the phone with Extron for an amount of time that would make you pass out and vomit. Like God bless them. Like I am so thankful to them for being on the phone with me for like 3 hours. Because some of the things we have found on that campus were so bizarre. And every time we thought we had it figured out, it was like, just kidding. It's something else.
So
And then it gets more fun when you have to be on the phone with multiple manufacturers. So fortunately, you're able to get it resolved just with one.
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
Most of the time that's been the case. There's at least one or two rooms on my Pocono campus that um my new Extron BFF and I actually were like, maybe this isn't an Extron problem after all. So I might need to make a call to another company. Shout out to Biamp. You might be hearing from me.
Fair enough.
so yeah, I something that you mentioned, and I think this will tie in with our programmers here as well. Is I for the longest time, Britt, I was, and I'm still kind of this way, like you, like I don't want to call tech support. I am tech support, but you know what? We want our users to call us when they have a problem. We're just their users, and I remember the one time that kind of dawned on me was I had to break down and call tech support back at my old school for the product we use, AMX. And I was really in the weeds. And I'm like, hey, look, I'm having this problem. We're going through. And I was like, this is the firmware I'm using. And the tech response goes, you're on that firmware? You know, that has a 90-day bug. I'm like, what 90-day bug? He's like, where it locks up every 90 days. I'm like, hey, that solves another problem I didn't even realize I had yet. Because I started to see a pattern, but it wasn't clicking on me. I'm like, okay, that solves. So you learn more by, reaching out to people like us tech support. We want our users to reach out to us. We gotta, eat our own dog food, as they say, reach out to other tech people. I know it's scary when tech people call tech people, but it's definitely you can benefit from it.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. And like you said, I feel like I do in that process, I also learn skills I can apply other places because, they might do, especially when you're on a long troubleshooting call. Sometimes I'm observing things and taking notes on things that like, all right, that didn't fix this particular issue, but I might be able to take that and use it where I'm having an issue somewhere else. So I very much see like everything as a learning opportunity and I write everything down. I don't know if that's like psychotic, but I'm like I got it because I don't feel confident I can cram jam all this in my brain and keep it there. So
That is actually smart. I'm psychotic because I don't write things down. I try to cram it in my brain, and then someone would be like, "Hey, we're having this issue." I'm like, "I saw that about 6 months ago. What did I do there?" Oh, and I'm trying to pull. No, you're not psychotic. I am. Write it down. And that's even like your equipment in your rack. Write it down.
You touched on two things actually I was going to come to, and I'm glad you said that because one thing that I have learned about you, Britt, is that you're organized, and that's really important. And really, and that's what somebody told me because I've been told I'm organized, and I take a lot of pride in that. And when I first started out, some of the integrators that I worked with, they were just shocked. They're like, you have your stuff together and you know where things are. And you like, they said that's not usually what programmers do. So it's going to be a skill that's really going to benefit you, and keep doing that and keeping good records, because then it's going to apply to versioning and it's going to apply to documentation and the more you learn and the more you have on it within your purview, you just can't keep it all in memory, even if you were incredibly talented in having a great memory. It's just it outgrows you.
Mhm.
And that stuff's and then troubleshooting, which seems to be where you started in getting to this. That's a huge asset for programmers. Huge, because you have to be able to narrow down where the problem is, because guess what? The first thing they're going to do is say, I pressed this button and it didn't do what it was supposed to, so it's the program.
Mm.
So we're in the business of trying to help people to understand where the problem truly lies. And sometimes it is in the program, but you have to be able to prove it to people. Otherwise, they're going to naturally blame the program.
And to be fair, I just started this particular journey 5 months ago. So if you push the button and it doesn't do what you think it does, it probably is the program. I probably did something wrong.
One thing though is if it worked yesterday and it didn't work today, it's probably not the program.
Okay,
Yeah.
good point. That's fair.
Because the program doesn't change on its own. So that's what we tell people often. Well, this has been a great conversation, and we're going to have you back for another episode where we're going to dig a little bit deeper. But anything that you wanted to ask of us, or anything that you wanted to touch on before we close this one and discuss more in the next episode?
I think my questions for you are more for the next episode.
Okay, great, great. Well, thank you for being here with us. And please tell everybody how to get in touch with you about your podcast and take a little bit of time to explain your podcast. I really think very highly of it, and I think a lot of people need to be listening. So please take the time to share that.
Oh, thank you. All right, yeah. So I'm Britt Yenser. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm also on X as Brave Brit. You can find my podcast Brave Space at higheradav.com, as well as pretty much your podcast, Player of Choice. So Brave Space is a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging podcast where AV professionals can join me and they can talk about their experiences in the AV industry and ways that they want to see the industry improve on a person to person level. So we're not necessarily talking technology, we're talking about what it means to be good humans. And Brave Skills is an offshoot of the Brave Space podcast. It airs underneath Brave Space. So if you follow Brave Space, you'll get Brave Skills. And that is with my co-host Leon Prather, who works for Avixa. So again, AV professionals, but not necessarily talking tech. We're talking about leadership and management, and just it's all about how to be a good human and keep moving forward and how to expand your soft skill set.
Excellent. Thank you. And again, highly recommended. And James and I have both been on in different cases. In fact, James been on multiple times. So, James, how can people get in touch with you? Any final takeaways and anything you wanted to share with regard to continuing the conversation?
Uh, this is a great conversation. I want to thank Britt for reaching out to us about this. This is something Steve and I want from our guests or listeners, is to reach out with their questions and how we can help them. Um, don't follow me, follow Britt. Like Steve said, her podcast is one of my favorite. I love listening to it. I learned so much from all the guests he has on there. Very powerful stuff. So definitely follow her. Also check out her writing on Higher Ed website, because he writes, and a lot of great information in there. And then he's also doing good things with HEPMA. So again, chop it up to Brit. She's doing great stuff. So follow her. Don't follow me. If you are inclined to follow me, I'm on Twitter or X at AV_James King. I'm on LinkedIn. Google me, you'll find me.
Excellent. And we're going to also see if we can get Britt into our Ask the Programmer LinkedIn group. And I'd like to challenge our audience to share some tips. What are something, one or two things that you would tell somebody first starting out in programming, and this way Britt can benefit from that. And that group is Ask the Programmer on LinkedIn, where we post these episodes and do have some additional conversation that stems from what we discuss here. Um, for me, you could find me at Steve Greenblatt on social media. My company, Control Concepts, is a supporter of the show. So one of the things that we do is we help programmers to succeed, and in doing so, we build API integrations in the form of modules, drivers, and plugins that help manufacturers and control platforms work together. And we also have some no cost and low cost utilities on different platforms. Um, Other than that, we would like to make sure you know you can view this podcast on YouTube or listen on your favorite podcast player. And we would always appreciate some feedback or outreach to know what you think and also what you want to hear more about. And until next time, this has been Ask the Programmer.